Judges chapter 16. We're going to finish out our look on Samson. Now, y'all are going to hear me sniffling. I'm pretty sure that is tied to all that yellow stuff that's outside. So, let's not be too concerned about that. But my nose has been running pretty severely. We're going to look at Samson. And when we think back on Samson and we look at the Bible stories for kids, we look at the children's Bible books that they introduce the children to in Sunday school, to all these great characters in the Bible. They try to downplay, I think, a little bit of the recklessness or the immorality of Samson's personality. Because we see when we look at the life of Samson, we see a slow decline and a slow departure from his faith, from his God, and falling further into immorality as he goes along. But we shouldn't gild the lily, as they say, when we as adults take an honest look at Samson. Samson is not someone to emulate. Samson is not someone to model our Christian life out of, because let's just think back on what has happened. He was unwilling to marry an Israelite woman, which is what the scripture told him to do. He wanted a Philistine woman, right? He had been sent to judge the Philistines, and he talked his parents into that fiasco, and they go over, and on the way, while all this is going out, it required them to make several trips, and Samson kills a lion, which he should have told his parents that he killed a lion so he could have been ceremonially cleansed, but he didn't. He hid that truth because he didn't want to go through the bother of following the law of God or following what God had asked him to do when he came in contact with a dead body. There was certain things that you had to do. And moreover, when he goes back the second time and he finds the honeycomb in the lion's carcass, he takes the honey from the honeycomb and eats it again, ingesting something that has made him ceremonially unclean. And then he goes to his parents and offers it to them without telling them that if they eat it, they're going to be ceremonially unclean. It's just a departure from his faith, and it gets worse and worse as we go when we look at the life of Samson. Long story short, they do the marriage ceremony for 7 days, and if you'll recall that I have talked about it many times, why does Jesus use marriage language when he's talking about himself and the church? Because in that day and age, and up through Jesus's time, the marriage supper came first before the consummation of the marriage. So it was a 7-day celebration, and at the end of the 7 days, then the marriage would be consummated and the marriage would be official at that moment. Samson makes this riddle, and his bride-to-be is frightened into nagging Samson so much that Samson tells her the answer to the riddle. And the bottom line is Samson loses the bet, and he has to now pay the bet of 30 changes of clothing, which was often in that day and age a sign of wealth. If you had multiple changes of clothing, you were wealthy, so a change of clothing was worth a whole lot back in those days. Just understand that the hours it took to weave those things, right? It took a long time. People just didn't walk down to Walmart and buy a triple pack of t-shirts, right? You had to spend a lot of time and effort to make clothing. So how does Samson fulfill that bet? He goes and kills to another town and kills 30 Philistines and takes their clothes and distributes them to the guest at the wedding supper to pay his debt. But now he's mad. He's mad at his to-be bride. He's mad at the whole situation, so he departs in anger. When he cools off, he goes back and expecting to consummate his marriage, but the father of the bride has given his daughter to someone else, the best man, and that's really sets Samson off. So Samson goes on a murdering spree, right? He burns, and then he burns their fields, and they chase him, and the men of Judah do not want to fight the Philistines, and Samson tricks them and said, if you bind me with new robes, then my strength is gone. And they give him over to the Philistines, but it doesn't work. And Samson breaks the ropes, and he picks up the jawbone of an ass, and he slays 1,000 people. And at this time, Samson is starting to feel good about himself. Samson is starting to feel that he is unbeatable, that he cannot be beaten. And so Samson is relying on himself. Notice what Samson has never done. Samson has never told anyone that his strength comes from God. I want you to contrast what Samson's attitude and David's attitude when he confronts Goliath. Does David claim that it is his own strength that he does these things by? No, it's by God's. Samson should have said, my source of strength is God. Right? This is where Samson is going off the rails. He is sent to judge, and part of that judging is to lead the Israelites back to God. But instead, he attributes his strength and his amazing strength to these frivolous things, because it allows him to continue to point the focus on himself as opposed to focusing on God. Does that make sense? So anyhow, at the end of that, Samson is famished and he's thirsty, and at the end of chapter 15, he asks God to refresh him, and God opens up water flowing from a rock, and this is where we come at chapter 16. In verse 20 of chapter 15, and he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. But he's not doing a very good job, because he's focusing and pointing everybody to himself. Samson was the big kahuna in his own eyes. He wanted everybody to look at Samson and think, wow, what a magnificent man. Right? We're not told that Samson was built like a bodybuilder. Chances are he wasn't. He was just a normal man, that God had imbued with him this strength because he was set aside for God's purpose, which was to judge Israel. Now, before you think I'm going to condemn Samson forever, if you read Hebrews chapter 11, chapter of the heroes of the faith, Samson is there. He is listed as one of the heroes of the faith because of what happens at the very end of chapter 16. So any questions on what has happened with Samson so far? Okay. Samson went to Gaza, and here is verse 1 of chapter 16. We see the further slide of Samson. He refused to marry an Israelite woman. He wanted to marry a Philistine. Now he is simply wanting to go into a prostitute. Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute, a Philistine prostitute. And he went into her, and the Gazites were told, Samson has come here, and they surrounded the place and set an ambush for him all night at the gate of the city. They kept quiet all night, saying, let us wait until the light of the morning, when we might kill him. But Samson lay till midnight, and at midnight he arose and took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the two posts, and pulled them up, bar and all, and put them on his shoulder, and carried them to the top of the hill that is in front of Hebron. Now, nowhere does it say that Samson became aware of this ambush that was set up against him. I don't believe he did. I believe he did this just to show off. And I believe when those who were setting in ambush against him saw what Samson had just done, they wisely decided to call the ambush off. But that's just my opinion. We don't know, right? We're not told how Samson, if Samson became aware of it, or he just did this on his own. I'm thinking he just did it on his own, because you can see the slide of Samson into self-focus and away from God and away from his faith. And Samson lay till midnight, and at midnight he arose and took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and two posts, and pulled them up, bar and all, and put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that is in front of Hebron. Scholars differ on where this is. If it's right in front of Hebron, that's about a 40-mile walk. Some scholars say he did a hill that you could see Hebron front. I don't know. Again, we're not told. It doesn't really matter. He's carrying this supernatural burden that he has ripped from the foundation of the city walls. And then after this, verse 4, he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Strangely enough, I went to school with a girl whose parents named her Delilah. She was a very nice girl, but it just always struck me. Her sister's name was Deborah, and she was Delilah. And I kept growing up all my life. I going, why would somebody name their child Delilah? But she was named Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, seduce him and see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to humble him. And then we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver, 1,100. So Delilah said to Samson, that's so each of the 5 lords, there's 5 lords of the Philistine, they're offering her 5,500 pieces of silver. She'll be set for life. So Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength lies, and how you might be bound that one could subdue you. Here we're introduced to a dilemma in our thinking, if we will. Is Samson being tricked? Is Delilah being tricky? No, Delilah is flat out coming out and asking for what she wants. I want to know how we can subdue you and beat you. Tell me that. And so then we have to understand and look and try to understand what is Samson's motivation with this exercise he goes through with Delilah. He gets closer and closer to the truth until he finally reveals the truth. I don't think Samson is stupid. I think Samson knows exactly what's going on. And I think Samson doesn't believe they can beat him anyhow. I think Samson is so caught up in his own story, his own mythology, that he is totally forgetting about God. He's totally forgetting that his strength comes from God, and he has begun to believe that his strength comes from him, from inside him, and he is going to use that, and he's just playing with her. I think he enjoys it. I think he enjoys making Delilah beg. I think he enjoys the game that they have going on. I think it's entertaining to him. So Delilah, verse 6, said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength lies, and how you might be bound that one could subdue you. Samson said to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. Then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Now she had men lying in ambush in an inner chamber, and she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he snapped the bowstrings as a thread of flax snaps when it touches the fire. So the secret of his strength was not known. So round 1 goes to Samson. Then Delilah said to Samson, behold, you have mocked me and told me lies. Please tell me how you might be bound. Again, she is not being subtle. She's not hiding what her desire is. She wants to know how he can be bound. And he said to her, if they bind me with new ropes that have not been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. So Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them, and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And the men lying in ambush were in the inner chamber, but he snapped the ropes off his arms like a thread. Then Delilah said to Samson, until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you might be bound. And he said to her, if you weave the 7 locks of my head with the web and fasten it tight with the pin. He's talking about in a loom. He's saying, if you weave my hair into 7 locks and put it in the loom where they made their cloth out of, and the pin, the loom pin, lock it in there with the pin. That's what he said. Then I shall become weak and be like any other man. So while he slept, Delilah took the 7 locks of his head and wove them into the web. And she made them tight with the pin. Now, it's been a long time since I'd had hair, but I would imagine if somebody is and it never happened to me in my life, because I never had long hair, that somebody was weaving my hair, I would feel that. Well, it seems that Samson was secure enough in himself that he is passed out drunk, more than likely. So while he slept, Delilah took the 7 locks of his head and wove them into the web, and she made them tight with the pin, and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he awoke from his sleep and pulled away the pin, the loom, and the web. And she said to him, how can you say, I love you, when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times, when you have not told me where your great strength lies. And when she pressed him hard with her words day after day, and urged him, his soul was vexed to death. And he told her all his heart, and said to her, a razor has never come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. So why does he tell her the truth? That's the question that always vexed me. Why does he tell her the truth? He knows what she's up to. 3 times she has done what he told her would succeed, and all 3 times they had set an ambush for him. He understands what she's trying to do. So he is either willing to surrender himself to the Philistines, or he doesn't really believe that his strength is coming from God at all. That was a tale his parents told, and he's thinking that I have won every time. They have never been able to best me. They won't be able to best me now. I will not let them cut my hair. But even if they do cut my hair, I'll still kill them. I'll still win. That's the only explanation I can come up with as to why Samson finally tells the truth. That and he doesn't really tell the whole truth. God gave him the great strength because he was a Nazarite, not because he had long hair. The long hair was part of the Nazarite vow. A part of the Nazarite vow was not eating or partaking of the fruit of the vine, either in eating the grapes or drinking the wine. But he was doing that regularly. So the fact that his strength come from being set apart by God, which is what the Nazarite vow means. He had been set apart for a mission, for God. God had something for him to do, and that was to judge the nation of Israel and free them from the Philistines. And the cutting of the hair seems to be the final tie back to his Nazarite vows. He's broken all his other Nazarite vows. This one he has still kept up all his life. And now he is finally, unequivocally, setting his Nazarite vows aside. And so God removes his spirit from him when he does that. When Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called the lords of the Philistines, saying, come up again, for he has told me all his heart. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hands. And she made him sleep on her knees, and she called a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. All right. And again, you're thinking, how could a man allow his head to be shaven? I know what this feels like, because I do mine twice a week. I sport the Yul Brynner haircut. Some of you younger people will not understand that. Some of us older folks know exactly who he is. But we're not talking about, they didn't shave his head. They just cut off the long locks that were apparently woven into seven, what do you call them, the braids. So they cut off the 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. And she said, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And he awoke from his sleep and said, I will go out as at other times and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. So it wasn't the fact that his hair was cut, it was the fact that the Lord had left him. And the Lord had left him because Samson has severed the last remaining tie to his Nazarite vow. And the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shackles. And he ground at the mill in the prison. But the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. So, but again, it's not the hair that is the problem, that is the issue. We'll see that in just a second. Now the lords of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to rejoice. And they said, our God has given Samson to our enemy has given Samson our enemy into our hand. And when the people saw him, they praised their God. They said, our God has given our enemy into our hand, the ravager of our country, who has killed many of us. And when their hearts were merry, in other words, they were drunk, they said, call Samson that he may entertain us. So they called Samson out of the prison, and he entertained them. They made him stand between the pillars. That's how he entertained them. They made him to stand up so everybody could laugh at him. They made him stand between the pillars. These are the 2 main pillars that are holding up the roof. And Samson said to the young man who held him by the hand, let me feel the pillars on which the house rests, that I may lean against them. Now the house was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there. And on the roof there were about 3,000 men and women. So we don't know the total. The roof held 3,000, who looked on while Samson entertained. Then Samson called to the Lord. First time we hear about Samson calling to the Lord. First time we hear about Samson praying. This is the first time that Samson returns to his faith and remembers that God had set him apart as a Nazirite. Okay? In the meantime, the hair that visualized him being a Nazirite had grown back out. But it's not the hair, it's the fact that Samson finally recognized where his strength came from. And he finally sought the Lord. This is why the author of Hebrews says Samson's going to be in heaven. Because at the very end, he turned back to God, and we're told he's one of the heroes of the faith. He's not the hero of the faith because of what happened in chapters 14, 15, and most of 16. He's a hero of the faith because he recognized where his strength came from and surrendered himself back to God. So, did that make sense? Then Samson called to the Lord and said, O Lord God, please remember me and please strengthen me only this once, O God, that I may be avenged on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And Samson grasped the 2 middle pillars on which the house rested, and he leaned his weight against them, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other. And Samson said, Let me die with the Philistines. Then he bowed with all his strength, and the house fell upon the lords and upon the heads of all who were in it. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he had killed during his life. Then his brothers and all his family came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah his father. He had judged Israel 20 years. So that is the story of Samson. And with that, we are going to finish out the tribe of Judges and begin looking at the book of Ruth, which is a contemporary story that happens during the time of the Judges. I also want you to know that Samson and Samuel were near contemporaries. Samuel is probably beginning his judgeship and his prophesying around the same time that Samson kills all of those Philistines. So that's what I got for tonight. Questions, comments? Nothing?
My picture that goes in my head as I was listening to that and reading that was the movie The Ten Commandments, where they show Samson and Delilah being all gorgeous and beautiful and all
Yeah.
that stuff. And, Samson pushes down the pillars and all that stuff. That is back in my day, that was the view of
Yeah, that's the view.
the Hollywood view of
Yeah.
Samson and Delilah.
But one thing I didn't touch on was that notice that first Samson wants to marry a Philistine woman. Then he goes into a prostitute, and then with Delilah, he's satisfied to just live with her. So that's that moral glide that that sin takes you on.
Yes.
Sin begets more sin. But he came at the end to recognize that his power ultimately came from God. And God used him for his purpose. And by his death, by his redemption, he was able to kill more. He was able to kill more than he killed during his lifetime. That cat is so funny to look at right now.
Between the cat, the squirrels, and the dog, I'm sure you have a very entertaining day.
Penelope, I'm going to stop the recording.